Thank you, everybody. We're so glad to have you here with us on this, our 5th webinar in the series. CEASE is an organisation that exists to dismantle and expose the cultural and commercial drivers of sexual exploitation. We work on topics like prostitution, pornography and trafficking, contextualising them as systems of violence against women and girls and fundamental human rights issues. Tonight, we have the honour of being joined by Dr. Ellie Hansen, clinical psychologist and researcher, and Gemma Kelly, our head of policy and public affairs. And the question we're considering is whether we can believe what OnlyFans says about itself. So as they present, please feel free to just note down privately any questions that you might have. And then when they finish speaking, please add them into the chat. And hopefully we'll have some time. I'm sorry, we are running over to discuss some of them. We want this to be a space where we can really discuss some thorny issues with compassion and respect. So yeah, please consider that in your questions. Thank you, Ellie. Over to you.
Thank you, Naomi. And I will just bring up my slides. How is that? If I could have a thumbs up. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, good. It is a pleasure to be with you all today. And yes, we're doing our best with the tech issues. And as you said, Naomi, this will be available for people to catch up on at a later date if people are still stuck in various labyrinthine waiting rooms. But yes, so I will be, and what I will try and do, given that we're starting late, is I would try and abbreviate some of what I'm going to talk about. My slides will be sent round, so they are actually quite dense and purposefully busy because I wanted you to all have a lot of material. Even if I can't cover it all in the talk, you can then go back to the slides and review at a later point. But yes, what we'll talk about tonight is OnlyFans, and really kind of the question here is what happens when sex for money becomes a societal norm, because that is what OnlyFans has achieved. It's been a hugely successful platform, and it has driven this cultural change to a point where sex work that was on the periphery is now very mainstream. And I really want to look at what has that meant? What has that gifted us with? So we need to start with looking at what OnlyFans is, how it operates, how it's narrated. As has been said, it's very much narrated as empowering and safe. But then I want to look behind that PR, and particularly to kind of delineate 4 areas. Firstly, the abuse and exploitation that the site is fueling. Secondly, the hidden dynamics and harms of sex work. Thirdly, how children and young people are being broken into this very harmful sexual culture and sexual scripts. And the pervasive harms of this increase in sexual objectification and male sexual entitlement. If we have time, we probably don't, but I'd like to touch on how did we get here? How did our culture enable this company to have the success in doing all of this that it has done? And crucially, where do we go from here? And happily, I would argue that there are some really kind of key critical things that we can do to make a really big difference to this really worrying status quo. So first of all, OnlyFans, what is it and how does it operate? As I've said, a hugely successful site. It is a content sharing platform where you have creators who are sharing photos, videos, live performances, chat, and they are subscribed to by their fans, in inverted commas, who may pay a monthly fee or pay per view. What we find is that most of those accounts are feature young women selling sexual content, and OnlyFans takes a 20% cut of all earnings through the site. It has an absolutely massive usage. Sorry, OnlyFans. This doesn't show me all of my slides. It has an absolutely massive usage. In 1 month, over 1 billion visits, it has over 300 million users and over 500,000 new subscribers every day. So this is a platform that is just exploding. And really that explosion can only be understood by looking at the wider ecosystem in which it operates. It can't be taken as a standalone platform. It is absolutely symbiotic with, in parasitic symbiosis, I would argue, with social media. So platforms like TikTok, X, Snapchat, and Instagram, and also the free porn tube sites like Pornhub and Xhamster. Now, the reason why that is because there's very limited advertising opportunities within the OnlyFans platform itself. So content creators are needing to push out a lot of content through social media and through the free porn platforms to generate attention, to generate subscribers and followers, hoping that some of them will migrate to their OnlyFans, and then they can turn that attention into financial subscriptions. So what that also means is that you have OnlyFans content creators who are financially incentivized to put out a lot of content on social media, which has then shaped many millions of people's social media feeds, because they are much more incentivized to create content than the average social media user. You also have management agencies. So these are companies that have popped up around OnlyFans, seeking to kind of feed off OnlyFans success. They will target girls on social media that they think can do well on OnlyFans. They will potentially kind of groom them into the industry, and they will then take a cut as they seek to market them and do their PR. You've also got what's called chatters. So if somebody is doing particularly well on OnlyFans, they may not have time to engage in the sexual chat function with all of their subscribers. So that may be outsourced by themselves or by their management agency to chatters. So these are people who will engage in sexual chat, often pretending to be, what is often the young woman. And so that chat job comes with its own burden, and it hasn't really been researched enough, but from what we can see, that comes with its own set of psychological harms. And then we've got the kind of bleeding out into other parts of life. So here I've just got a photo of two OnlyFans content creators. They were holding up very sexually explicit messages at a major football match. But you've also got what might be better known is Lily Phillips and Bonnie Blue, two UK OnlyFans performers who have kind of shot to fame through this competition with one another in terms of how many that they develop this business model where it's about doing extreme things. For example, how many men they can sleep with who aren't, that those men are not paying for that sex, but Bonnie Blue and Lily Phillips will then make money through that via showing that content behind their paywall. So it's really changing the shape of how of the sex industry and how it operates and the kind of financial flows. So let's just have a look at the money side. Given those figures, no surprise that this is incredibly lucrative. Users spent $6.6 billion on OnlyFans in 2023, the last year for which we have figures. And the owner of OnlyFans, Leonid Radvinsky, has made upwards of $1.3 billion from the site since 2020. He awarded himself for over 400 million payout in 2023, which equates to $1.3 million a day he's giving himself. Now, just sometimes we get confused sometimes it's hard to translate a billion from millions. So I just wanted to give you a shorthand way of doing this. 1 million seconds is 11 days. 1 billion seconds is 31.5 years. So when we talk about billions, we are talking about something astronomically bigger than millions. We're talking about huge amounts of money here. And this man is getting all of this cash essentially by through a kind of through a rental economic model. So he is charging rent on all of these sexual transactions. He's not being particularly innovative or creating a useful commodity. It's a rental model. But all of this money's flowing, but the average person who's creating sexual content on OnlyFans isn't earning very much at all. They're earning, on average, between $150 and $180 a month. OnlyFans, core to the OnlyFans success is the way in which it's been narrated by itself and others as fun, lucrative, ethical, empowering, and safe. So it describes itself as the subscription social media platform facilitating authentic connections between creators and their fans. Keely Blair, the CEO, argues that it's a site catering to all of grown-ups' interests. As she says, lots of people who are over 18 like sex, but they also like comedy, sports, and music. We treat all content the same as regards payment codes. It's not important to us whether the content is adult content, Instagram plus, horse racing, bike racing. So this is absolutely critical to its success, that OnlyFans is saying that sex is no different from any other part of life and should be treated in no different way, and we don't need to think about it to any deeper extent. It has also very much narrated itself as safe. We age verify all of our users, we check for consent, we moderate all of our content. And these messages have largely been accepted by society. In tandem with that, OnlyFans has given a lot of money to organisations in the child protection space. And that has meant that they've been given a platform in that space, a seat at the table, trust, and silence. But the big but is that behind all of this sparkly PR and acceptance by society, we have a massive abuse problem. So last week, the Mirror revealed that OnlyFans has been linked to 1,600 crimes in the UK within the last 5 years. And we know that every reported crime is the tip of the iceberg. That news story follows hot on the heels of a Reuters 7-part series, each of which exposes a different forms of abuse that OnlyFans is fueling. And this abuse fits into a wider set of circles. So, at the core, we've got this abuse of both adults and children. But then we've got around that the harms of selling sex, even if that isn't sex that's part of trafficking or whatever else. Then we've got the circle of young people being lured and deceived into selling sex. And then we've got the kind of wider societal harms of the misogyny, objectification, and male entitlement that is being promoted and normalized and glorified by all of this. So I want to just, in the small amount of time that we have, take each of these circles and look at them in a bit more detail. And sadly, what better place to start with trafficking, coercive control and exploitation than Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate is, whatever else he may be, he has a skill at spotting an opportunity, and he was one of the early people that spotted the potential for OnlyFans to as a platform through which he could abuse and exploit women. As we know, Andrew and Tristan Tate are charged in Romania with human trafficking. That relates to 7 victims, but further allegations involving children are being investigated. So as he has said, my job was to meet a girl, get her to fall in love with me to where she'd do anything I'd say, and then get her on webcam so we could become rich together. Obviously, that rich together was a lie. This is him in messages with his followers. Ibiza asset, that means a woman he has met in Ibiza, has agreed to do OnlyFans. Since she moved to Bucharest, she's been fed, but nothing else. She's broke and she can't go home. She can't leave the house. Man, I sound almost evil, but I'm not. I'm a shepherd leading the sheep. So although OnlyFans is saying that they check for consent and they check for age, the reality is that OnlyFans has absolutely no clue, in the same way that nobody viewing OnlyFans content has any clue as to what's going on behind the scenes and how a girl or a woman has ended up in front of that camera. And this is one key way that girls are ending up in front of that camera, through grooming, coercive control, and trafficking. And sadly, Andrew and Tristan Tate did not confine themselves to their direct abuse. They also set up a whole system via which to teach many other men who we can predict are out there applying these methods and teaching other men. And it was effectively a pyramid scheme. So this was Tate's War Room, a social network and Telegram channel, and his PhD, in inverted commas, which standard for Pimp Hose Degree Program. Obviously, he's had to stop doing a lot of this now that he's been under house arrest, etc., and the focus is on him. But like I say, that the damage has been done in what he's taught, and that's now out in the world, having its effects. And I'm just going to share some of the messages from this war room, which shows the types of methods that were being taught and applied to women. We deliberately reduce attention and note if she chases. Then we set up a coffee date, execute a move to find out if she's willing to pay for our coffee and serve us. After that, it becomes a series of gradual steps to remove her entire support structure from her life. Then we punish her for a transgression, real or imagined, by having her get her name tattooed on her, leaving her family's home, webcamming, stripping, walking the track for us, getting us girls, escalate, escalate, escalate. The real goal is for her to agree to never go anywhere without me. I need her working. Pavlovian conditioning, this is how you train dogs. She doesn't even have a wallet. Why do I need one, Daddy? I can't count it anyway. This just gives you a flavour of the extreme misogyny, the treatment of girls as objects simply for male gratification, and for obedience and abuse. I know I'm moving quite quickly, and I do apologise for that, just given our late start, but I'm hoping that you can keep up. I'm sorry that there's a lot of material, and it's quite difficult material. So no doubt there'll be time needed for us all afterwards to just process some of this. But I want to move on to a second area of abuse that OnlyFans is fueling, and this is child sexual abuse. And a lot of my material here is based on Reuters investigation. So I really do encourage anybody wanting further information to go and have a look at the Reuters 7-part series. In one of those investigations, they found multiple accounts on OnlyFans that appeared to show underage girls, like the one that I've got in the slide here. And many of these accounts were using very similar language, similar emojis, which suggested that they are being controlled by the same individuals, the same group. In a nutshell, what this is looking like is organised child sex trafficking. When Reuters brought this to the attention of OnlyFans assured them that they have, all their procedures had been followed as normal. And yet they then removed all of these accounts without explaining why. So we're kind of left with questions about that. If they were actually all fine, then why did they remove them? If they weren't all fine, then why is it taking journalists to find these accounts and alert OnlyFans that their measures clearly aren't working? Alongside that, we've also got the situation of vulnerable children selling themselves on OnlyFans. So, for example, a girl who's run away from home. She says here, I felt scared. I didn't know what to do. I just needed a way to make money. So that's when I was like, okay, let me start an OnlyFans. Now, you might ask, well, how could she do that if they've got age checks? These age checks are very, very easy to bypass. And often young people can just ask around, and there'll be an adult who set up an OnlyFans account who's no longer using that, and that child can just take that account over. That's one of many ways in which it's possible to do this. Her mother reported this to OnlyFans. and asked for it to be taken down when she discovered that her child was doing this. I kept checking it every day and it was still up there. They never reached back out to me. This is part of a pattern that Reuters has uncovered where OnlyFans are not responding in a timely fashion. And they're saying things like, well, we'll remove the material once we can confirm it's non-consensual, even if it's the very victim of the material getting in contact, which does prove it's not non-consensual. We've also got many situations in which an adult will be running an OnlyFans account. They will rape or abuse a young person, and they will then distribute that content through their own OnlyFans. And we've also got situations where adults are sharing child sexual abuse material, and that isn't being picked up by OnlyFans for many months, despite the fact that they're saying they moderate everything. Again, another spotlight of other forms of abuse that we need to talk about. Image-based abuse, where images from adults are shared non-consensually or for children for profit. So this used to be called revenge porn. That's a problematic term for many different reasons, not least because the motives are now changing. The motives are expanding. So revenge might have been a primary motive in the past, but now that we have the OnlyFans business model, profit is a new primary motive. So I'm depending a lot here on Megan Donovan's fantastic research, surveys and interviews of people who've been caught up in this webcamming. I turned around and saw that he was taking a video. This is a woman just talking about her boyfriend. I asked him what he was doing, and I got really scared. But he began to say, yeah, but you know that you can make money off of this, which it turns out he had done. It was awful. So often there's kind of secret recording and then men uploading this recording onto their OnlyFans accounts to profit. We also have coercive control. So it may look as if a woman is running her own OnlyFans account for herself, but behind that may be domestic violence and abuse. He said, we'll create an account on OnlyFans and you'll make material there. It looked as if the account was run by me. The men probably had no idea that it was him controlling the account. That woman also describes giving interviews to journalists where she talked about the fun and empowerment of OnlyFans, literally with her husband sitting next to her, having coerced her into saying all of that. As mentioned, we also have the filming, sharing and profiting from sexual assault and rape. And in summary, the OnlyFans approach to all of this has been characterised by inaction, minimisation, silence and gaslighting. It is absolutely shocking the number of times that Reuters has brought to their attention this abuse, and they've responded with a no comment, which is gobsmacking. These are really serious allegations, and yet they have the brazenness and audacity and think that they're just above the law to not even have to try and defend themselves. And let's not forget in all of this that they are making millions from rape and abuse. So I'm afraid still not slowing down given our timings. I want to move to talk about situations where we don't have overt abuse, where we have young women and young men and older people who are selling sexual services through OnlyFans and other similar platforms, but they're not under the overt control or abuse of a particular individual. We have been better at talking about the harms and distress and trauma of being caught up in prostitution, so in-person selling of sex. But there's been a kind of blur around other forms of selling sexual services, such as stripping, studio pornography, and webcamming. And yet there's a lot of commonalities across all of these forms of sex work. All of them involve the suspension, the suppression of one's sexual autonomy, or as Rachel Moran describes it, sexual serenity, in exchange for money. There's a repression of your sexual self. In all of these forms, erosion of boundaries is normal. and they each have their own unique hardships. There may be absolutely some particular hardships to in-person prostitution, but it's not possible to say that webcamming is just not as bad, because in webcamming we have its own particular harms, which I'll talk about in a which I through this I want to kind of foreground the voices of people caught up in this and survivors. So I hope to do that. So again, drawing on some of the people interviewed by Megan Donovan and colleagues. These are people who have been webcamming. Everything happened on their terms, so it was incredibly degrading for me. I wasn't in a position where I could control what I did because I was in a desperate need of money for drugs. So again, like, I guess the main thing I'm doing in this presentation is we might start with the woman or the man behind the camera, but then we're always like widening out and thinking, well, what's going on behind the scenes and around the scenes? So for Maria, it was the desperation for drugs. I wouldn't have taken those pics if it weren't for OnlyFans. There were times when I got a request for something I didn't really want to do, but they offered a lot of money. So I thought, okay, I'll just film this video that I don't actually want to do, send it. And then if someone asks for it again, I already have the video. If only I could build up a library of stuff I didn't want to do, then at least I wouldn't have to suffer. But the more requests came in for things I didn't want to do, it was hard to say no. This is a really good evocation, kind of summary of the gradual erosion of boundaries that time and time again survivors and those working in this space talk about. You start off with boundaries of what you're going to do, but the competition and the push for novelty from the buyers is always pushing in one direction. Sometimes what I found almost the hardest were the times when they wanted it to be like a relationship. I feel like that's almost worse than when they're violent, because it gets intimate in a really forced way. So for Evelina, and again, all of these quotes speak for many, many people. It was that, you know, sometimes people selling sex can talk about two selves, but actually if somebody's wanting the relationship, it's harder to keep that boundary between the two. The toughest part is having to talk to them. And if you haven't posted anything in a week, they're like, I'm going to cancel my subscription. And people are always on your case. Why aren't you replying? They want to meet up. You have to keep up with the fantasy they have. You can't just say, no, I never want to meet you. I hate you. Instead, you have to play the role. So that contrast between actually hating these men that are buying her and having to pretend that you're loving it, and self-pretense and the pretense to others is at the heart of this experience. And then there's the unique impact of images. As Anna says, the material doesn't go away. There's this constant anxiety of wondering who has seen it, when you might get outed and so on. It's a really brutal kind of anxiety to carry around. So the particular harms of webcamming, you don't know who is recording it. You don't know who is watching it. Reuters feature a case where a young woman finds out that her uncle has been her biggest fan, and the horror of that. And again, looking behind the scenes, we need to think about the pathways by which somebody ends up in this situation of being on OnlyFans. And again, this is something I could talk for hours about, so I'm sorry I'm rushing through. But there are many interacting pathways, and there are many interacting influences on somebody's pathway. And I'm certainly not saying, by the way, that, you know, all of these factors will be happening for all people. And there may be some people for whom none of these factors are playing a part. People may come back to me on what I'm saying here and say, well, actually, there's plenty of people on OnlyFans who honestly just feel empowered and enjoy it. And actually, I'm not really debating that. I think that's perfectly possible for that to be the case, as well as all of this to be the case. And even if there are some people for whom none of this is an issue, that doesn't outweigh the huge risk that it is holding for others and the huge trauma that others are experiencing. So in a way, there's kind of like, I would kind of divide the influences into two. There's maybe kind of earlier experiences and messages, which may be leaving some people with few choices and with low self-worth. And then in the other hand, there may be these kind of factors that are pulling them into it, deceiving them, saying that this is really empowering and fun, and persuading them in. So we've got the agencies that I spoke about. We've also got friends. OnlyFans has an absolutely horrific recommend a friend scheme where if you are on OnlyFans and you get someone else to come onto it, you're given 20% of their earnings, or it may not be 20%, but you're given a cut of their earnings. So we could actually rename this Pimp a Friend. But also girls and some boys are being persuaded by the PR of influencer webcamming girls. This is an absolutely massive issue, and I'm just very aware of time. Naomi and Gemma, would you like me to try and, how long have I got? I'm just aware that I'm needing to shorten it.
Joe, I think it would be really good to hear the end of this.
Yeah, okay. I've got quite a lot more, but I'm going to just try and shorten it to 5 minutes. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to rush. So I'm just thinking about how I do this. I want to focus a little bit on these influences because I think they're quite important. So to give some examples, girls targeted, the agencies. This is a woman who has become a whistleblower, having worked in one of these agencies, and she describes it like this. I spent a considerable amount of time in contact with girls on TikTok and Instagram, encouraging them to do OnlyFans, to try to get them to join our agency. For girls who didn't meet our minimum earnings, we'd give them tips on how to grow their OnlyFans account so they could join us. They would then make it their life mission to grow their OnlyFans so they could be part of our agency. We let them think we cared for them. Some were lonely and socially isolated. Many came from broken homes. I'm just wanting to jump through to what it's looking like on social media for many young people now. And Melinda Tankard-Rice, who heads up Collective Shout in Australia, has done an extensive research project into the culture on TikTok, where many young people are being absolutely bombarded by content from OnlyFans porn performers who are incentivized to present their lifestyles as glamorous and fun, as just as shown in some of these videos here. This is very much glorifying this as a lifestyle choice. So girls are being kind of lured into it, thinking that it may be a lot less traumatic than it really is. But in actual fact, as sex work takes hold, a number of dynamics come into play. So it can be, as we talked about, young people being pushed or deceived into it. As time goes on, there's a gradual erosion of boundaries. Your subscribers are wanting more from you to keep the amount of money you originally had coming in. You're having to do more extreme things. This is traumatic and distressing. And so to cope with that trauma and distress, there's a number of psychological things that we do. Dissociation is number one tool to cut off from yourself, to numb your emotions, to create a false sense of self. But there can also be this other thing of traumatic reenactment, and who better to describe that than Mia Doring, who is a psychotherapist and survivor of the sex trade, who's written her own memoir about it. And she describes it like this. Reenacting trauma means putting yourself in similar situations or places to the original trauma, or finding similar people to create a new narrative in an attempt this time to be in control, to write a new ending, one in which you are in charge and not victimized. The sex trade is the perfect place for the sexually traumatized to try unconsciously to resolve former hurt, because an unending number of men want to use your body. So this is a big phenomenon that I, working as a therapist, have seen it many a time, where somebody will revisit a trauma that they've gone through They will create a situation reminiscent of the original trauma to try and resolve the powerlessness of that original trauma. But in actual fact, creating these very similar situations just actually worsens those feelings. And I think if I look at somebody like Lily Phillips, I'm very clearly seeing this traumatic reenactment play out. The worse the trauma gets, the more you put yourself into further trauma to try and resolve the previous one, and it spirals down. As all of this is going on, you're dissociating and you're pretending to yourself and to others that this is all okay and that you're okay. You're in survival mode. As you can see, I've got many more slides here than I can go through, but there's more for you to revisit if of interest. And as I said, what's happening in all of this on social media is that children and young people are being broken into this sexual economic logic. They are being taught through all of this content that sex is a transaction in which girls sell their bodies and their performance to males who buy. That is what sex is. And OnlyFans in all of this is creating a culture in its own image, in service of its own profit. And that is a world in which sex is a transaction that it takes a cut from. You know, in the OnlyFans ideal world, they are taking a cut. They are taking rent from every sexual experience. And, you know, what is the dystopia that then is? So I'm going to just maybe say one last thing, that when we're living in a culture which routinely objectifies people, now what I mean by that is sees them primarily in terms of their physical sexual appeal, we are then dealing with a lot of ripple effects of that. A lot of research shows that when we objectify others, we start to see them as being less competent, less moral, less deserving of moral treatment, less warm, less sensitive to pain, and we see them as having less of a mind. And I've written an essay on this to explore this in further depth. But in a nutshell, you can just take one of those things and you can see that it's a small step on from that to treating somebody badly. And, you know, very depressingly, people will also do this to themselves. So if we self-objectify, if we see ourselves primarily in terms of our physical sexual appeal, then we dumb ourselves down and we expect less good treatment from ourselves and from others. So you can see how this is playing into widespread misogyny. And ultimately, it is making good relationships between boys and girls, men and women, much harder to achieve. This is just a quote from a young, a 15-year-old who I recently interviewed as part of a research project, talking about male peers in her school. They're seeing women as not people. You can't even say this stuff to them because they're not that mature yet. They won't understand. They'll just laugh at you. You can't be like, I'm not an object, I'm a human being, because they don't see you. They don't see you as one. And I think that's same with a lot of boys, even boys that haven't done bad things. Just all of the boys that I know in my school. And, you know, for her, the idea of a kind of friendship with boys was just out of reach. So this is really tragic. There's many reasons how we've got here, which I don't have time to go into, but relate to how our culture has sold us a very narrow version of freedom that is promoting the freedom of the most powerful, and in service of their profits. And alongside all of that, what it means to be human has really been lost. So where do we go from here? There's a number of key steps that we can take, and I know that Gemma's going to talk more about some of these, about what CESE is doing, but my kind of starter for 10 would include raising the age by which a company can profit, if we actually want to allow that profit at all. I think we really need to talk about that as part of bringing in the Nordic model, in which we look to criminalize the buying of sex. And also we need to, you know, ban all invitations or encouragements to sell sex. Platforms need to be moderating all sexual content in advance and showing us how they do that. I'll just end with some further reading and listening for those that might be of interest. But yes, apologies, this has been rather rushed. I will hand over to Gemma. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Ellie. And yes, thank you for doing that absolute whistle stop tour. And again, apologies to everybody for the disaster that is technology. So we are very sorry. So I am not going to keep anybody very long. I just want to let people know about what Seats are doing at the moment in relation to OnlyFans and our work around that. So we have been looking at OnlyFans for about a year and a half, maybe 2 years now, and working with other organisations to try to work together so that we can essentially stop all of the horrific abuse that Ellie has just mentioned. Immediately in the immediate future, we are doing a social media campaign, and that aims to provide our followers with engaging, shareable content that will expose the realities of OnlyFans and really counter the PR propaganda that they are spreading at the moment, because it really is everywhere. As Ellie said, it is hard to escape from their lie of empowerment and financial security without any risk. So please do follow us, share the material with people that you know, read it, engage with it. I promise our social channels run a lot better than this webinar. So please do check that out. The other thing that we are waiting very patiently for is the independent pornography review, which is due to be released in due course, as we have been repeatedly told by the government. And we have sent in some very specific recommendations to that pornography review about OnlyFans, about how we think it should be regulated. A lot of what Ellie has already shared is what we will be looking for. So we need to get past that paywall. Law enforcement need to be able to see what's actually happening on the site so that they can be tracking down trafficking, CSAM, etc. And we also would like to know how it is that they are moderating all of their millions of pieces of content, because at the moment we only have their word for it that they are, and clearly they're not doing a very good job. So stay tuned for that. We will have more information when the pornography review comes out. We are hoping that it will include our recommendations on OnlyFans and others who have been calling for similar things. And yeah, we will keep you updated. When we hear, you will hear. So stay tuned. That's us, because we are super tight for time.
We are, and thank you so much. Thank you, Ellie, for that incredible, really, it was so rich. There's so much there. The slides will be available afterwards, so you can kind of read through and kind of unpack it in your own time as well. But there's so much food for thought. And Gemma, just the kind of reassurance that we can fight back, that there is hope. I think the more of us that start to kind of see behind the propaganda, the more hope there is.